Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Tuesday morning, April the 12th. I'm glad to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. And we're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And I'm just trying to wake up here having a coffee. And yesterday the sound was just horrible on the show. I hope today is a little bit better so people can hear me. It sounded like I was in a tunnel or driving or something. But it was actually just the sound from the connection, I guess, for Blog Talk Radio. So hopefully the show is streaming a little bit better than yesterday. And yeah, I just want to take a look at, dealing with unwanted, being unwanted, unloved. I guess in most, a lot of this falls under the category of emotional, psychological abuse. And it's just something that I have to deal with on a daily basis. And I think a lot of people do. And I just, by looking around at how many children are, around the world being abused and being neglected and just, being basically shown and told that they're not wanted. This is something that a lot of people face. And I know myself, I've had an extremely hard time dealing with this in my life. And mainly because it's a feeling that just doesn't go away. It just stays there because that's where, my inner child is still suffering from, not experiencing that bond, that maternal bond and that paternal bond, and not getting what she needed, my small inner child, from so long ago, right? You would think, how could this affect somebody so many years later? You know what I mean? I'm getting, really close to 50 now. I'm creeping up on 50. I will be in a few years. I'm actually, creeping up on 46 is what I'm, that's, so I'm still a few years away from 50. But the thing is like, you think, well, how long, how long am I going to really feel this way? How long am I going to, not be able to feel sort of, some sort of restitution or some sort of, feelings that things have been made right with my inner child. And I really believe that we really are ultimately the only people that can do that for ourselves, because it's not like I can go back to my parents and get what I needed from them, you know what I mean? Like, my dad's like almost 90 and he's really, he's not doing all that well, you know what I mean? And he's not capable of going back and correcting the past. My mother's like 16 years in the grave, and she was my main abuser, and I don't think she would have changed over the last 16 years even. She felt the way she did, and she was not wishy-washy about it. She really, she just could not be the mother that I needed. And so many people have probably experienced this, and many people, around the world have been given up for adoption, and placed with other people and placed in care, and that their parents were not emotionally not capable of showing that love and showing that, that bond, and giving that child that bond. And I think that's such a huge gift, that parents would give their children. So that's kind of what we're talking about this week. So, I'm not a counselor or therapist. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own shows. And so you have to listen at your own discretion to all of my shows, because I'm just a private citizen paying to do my shows. And I'm talking about abuse, and mainly my story, and just bringing out, issues and information regarding child abuse and adult survivor issues. So you have to listen at your own discretion. Abuse is a sensitive subject, and, I just tell it like it is. And it may be, a lot of people may find the information uncomfortable, and it may make you uncomfortable. So you have to know what's good for you to listen to, and you have to be aware that this type of information can bother people. Abuse is not talked about mainstream. It's very uncomfortable. It's a horrific topic to talk about. But yet, if we don't talk about it, it just stays hidden behind closed doors, hidden away in silence. And I think that we do need to talk about this stuff. But you have to know what's good for you to listen to. So if you feel like the show might bother you, then you have to turn it off. And young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my show. Have someone who's older, like an adult, like a parent, caregiver. Hopefully you have one that cares. I know that I didn't have, a parent who cared about what I was doing. So, and I had two parents, but neither one of them really cared. So I know what that's like. So if you don't have a parent who cares, then find someone who in your life who's older, who can help you make a decision. Even like a coach or a mentor or somebody at school, like a teacher that actually has proven themselves trustworthy, and have them just listen to my show, to make sure that it's something that you should be listening to, right? Because I think young people should be protected at all times. And I think that, age appropriately, this is This show is ultimately about stopping child abuse and about child abuse, but really, there's a lot of adult content on my shows, and I think the young people under the age of 18 should have someone listen to the show with them to make sure it's something you should be listening to, right? So, yeah, thanks everybody for being here. I appreciate it. I'll go ahead and I'll give you the name of the article that we were talking about, and the website yesterday was from, it's called Messengers 2, and it's www.messengers2.com. It's just an article that I found searching around on the web. And it's an old article from 1993 from Philip G. Ney, N-E-Y, M.D., F-R-C-P-C. I'm just not sure what those initials stand for. But I think some of the article, is sort of addressing unwantedness and child abuse. That's what it's called, unwantedness and child abuse. And it's really just talking about, the difference between, whether there is a difference or not, between children who were supposedly wanted and planned for, planned pregnancies and planned families, and children who were not wanted. And they were just going through by studies that were done, talking about whether there was any difference in the amount of children who were abused or neglected, who were whether it was a planned pregnancy or whether it was just a child who was really not planned for and not wanted. And so, many children, I think a lot of people have to deal with this as adult survivors, whose parents may have told them, or even a parent, or may have told them that they were not wanted and that they were not planned for, and so many times people emotionally batter their children with that kind of stuff to make them feel bad. And I know, like when I was growing up, my mother, she on purpose used to tell me this stuff to hurt me. Right? She was so miserable herself, like she could not just be miserable herself and then be good to her kids. She would try. There were days where she would really try. Because we knew she was suffering. She was when my parents were brought up on child abuse charges, they were both diagnosed mentally ill. Like my dad was diagnosed borderline schizophrenic, as well as other personality disorders. My mother was diagnosed manic depressive at the time, and both of them had been abused as children. So they were both miserable from their childhoods, both miserable from their marriage. They had a lot of marital dysfunction, marital abuse, and it was just absolutely horrific. So my dad was always, I was saying yesterday on the show that my dad would never take responsibility for us, and was saying that all the kids were somebody else's, that my mother was sleeping around with all these people and producing all of these children, right? Which obviously she wasn't. She knew that, he was, and that would make her mad, because she'd be like, you're the father of all these children, and it's a shame. She used to say stuff like, I wish they were other people's children. I wish that they were the postman's children or the neighbor's children, because sadly enough, they're your children. So she hated my dad, and I don't think she hated him. She hated what he was doing to her, and she hated what he was doing to the family, and she hated the fact that she wasn't getting any support. So it was, it's really quite unfortunate. So we had to grow up listening to this stuff, and then my mom, of course, when she was bummed out or angry or upset at me, then she would quite often throw in my face that, that I was just this raped child that she didn't want anyway, and that she didn't want any of her children. She wasn't just picking on me. I mean, she told me that she didn't want any of her children, and she would just lash out and say these horrible things. And then later on in life, as an adult, she would say them too, see. So it wasn't like she was just saying this one or two times because she was mad and just lost, her inability to control her speech and just, lashed out and hurt us. I mean, she literally reinforced it all the way through our adult lives as well. And then even up into about the year before she passed away, she actually told me that again, and made it very clear that we were not wanted, and I was just, it was just devastating, because they had an opportunity when the courts got involved, when my parents were brought up on child abuse charges. They could have let us go because the courts wanted to remove us from the home anyway, but my mom supposedly begged and pleaded the courts to let us stay. This is what my mother told her. My mother would say this because she wanted us to feel like she had tried so hard to be a good mother, like that she was the only one that cared, because my parents were always in competition with each other to be the parent that was actually the one that cared. Like neither one of them cared about their children, but they would fight to gain the children's, like to get children to be on their side, because there was 7 siblings, right? And there was 5 of us in the home at any given time. So, they would use these types of things to try to get us to side with them, right? So because their relationship was just completely destroyed. And so they weren't even on a level where they could actually talk or have a conversation. So, my dad, if he was mad at my mom, he'd be like, "Well, your mother's just crazy, and I'm the one that cares for you," and to us, to his children, and then my mom would do the same thing, and she'd say, "Oh, your father's just crazy, and I'm the one that pleaded the courts to let you stay in the home, and I'm the one that was trying to be the good parent, right? Because they were busted on child abuse charges, right?" And so, this we had to listen to this our whole lives, and they were both trying to make themselves look like the better parent all the time, and neither one of them was a decent parent. Neither one of them was doing the right thing by their children, and that it's sadly enough, like my mother would use this as as a way to try to get us to side with her, but we were already siding with my mother anyway, really against my dad, like all of the siblings, because my dad was hurting her, and he was horrible. He was hurting us, he was hurting her, and he was in turn hurting himself because he lost the love of his family. He lost the love and this awesome relationship that he could have had with my mother. And so really, ultimately he did hurt himself in the process, because none of his children ever respected him or, could really show him any kind of, father, like childhood love towards him. Like, we all hated him, you know what I mean? And we all used to tell him that we hated him. And my brothers would try to protect my mother, of course, like I always talk about, and my older brother, my older siblings. But the dysfunction was just so absolutely out of control. It was just disgusting. No child should ever have to grow up like that. And so many of us have, and that's the sad part. And so, this is the thing. My mom, she would just throw this out that, she pleaded the courts, that she wanted us to stay in the home. She was a good mother and blah, blah, blah. And it's because her mother was her abuser. And I think she didn't want to be looked at in the same, in the same way that her mother was, because her mother abused her children. So my grandmother was a horrifically abusive woman who abused a whole bunch of children, including orphans, and killed one of her own sons, and just this horrible woman. And so my mother didn't want to lump herself into the same class as her mother, so she would be like, "Well, I pleaded the courts, and it was all your father," trying to make it look like it was all our dad who was the abuser, but my mother was my main abuser, who used to abuse me horrifically. And so, all the way through. And when she couldn't physically batter me anymore, she was emotionally battering me and verbally battering me right up until the day before she died, pretty much. So this is the issue. So many of us will not be able to get that back. And nobody can, really, from adulthood. You can't go back and try to get this stuff from the people that should have been able to provide this nurturing and this bond, this love, and as children. We have to do this ourselves, and this is what I'm kind of working through. You know what I mean? It's learning how to get this this situation back for myself, so that my inner self, my inner child, I guess, if you want to call it, from so long ago, can learn to feel better about the whole thing. You know what I mean? I do feel a lot better than I used to. Let me tell you that. I used to really struggle with this, and what it did was it caused me a lot of anger. Just feeling unwanted and unloved, and being told that I wasn't unwanted, and that I was unwanted, and that I wasn't that I was just this rape child. You know what I mean? It used to bother me a lot. It was absolutely horrific, and it caused me a lot of anger and depression and everything else. But now I'm able to do a lot of self nurturing and self talking to myself and saying, no, what the past is the past. Can't go back and change the past, but we can change the future. This is something that I keep in my mind all the time, that I have to live in the present, first of all, and that looking back at the past is okay if we, especially if we can do it. I'm doing mine self-help, but some people can't do that. So that's why it's important, that if you can't cope and you're not functioning and you're not able to do, things to take care of yourself, you do need to get help, right? This is very important. I realized that myself, because I grew up in this mess, and so I know how easy it is to not be able to get help, to not be able to do the right things by myself, because I was not shown how to do that as a child. So I recognize that point where, if that happens, I'll have to go get help. Because I certainly don't want to end up like my mother, first of all, who, was depressed and would stay in bed for like 3-4 days at a time. And then when she was up, she was mad and angry and abusing people. Not just me. My other siblings too, right? But I seemed to be an easy target for her, because I was the youngest child and I was at home quite a bit, and the other kids were older and they were quite often out of the house, and they wouldn't. It's probably a good. I don't know whether it was a good thing they took me with them anyway, because they were up to no good, just doing drugs and getting in trouble with the police. So it was, I mean, really, what my options weren't very good. But this is the thing. Like, I don't want to end up like that. So I know what it's like to see people who cannot function properly. I've always been a pretty high functioning person, and which is probably what's gotten me through. But some people can't, and so if you can't, you need to get help. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what I made a promise to myself, that if I can't cope and I'm not able to do what I need to do to get through the day, to function in my adult life, even just doing normal things, like working, cleaning the house, taking care of pets, taking care of myself, and even just getting up and having a shower and getting things done. You know what I mean? Sometimes people get to the point where they can't even do that stuff, and that's where you really need to reach out and get some help, right? And I made a promise to myself that I would do that. So and so that's my promise to myself. And if it came to the point where I couldn't cope and I just was going more downhill and more downhill. So I have been to the point before where I was very close to that, and so I recognize it. You know what I mean? And I haven't been there for a long, long time. And that's mainly because I allowed myself to begin this healing journey, right? And so, I would hope that people would not let themselves get down to that point, you know what I mean? Because we certainly did not deserve to be there in the first place. And we ultimately are responsible for our adult lives. So we have to make sure we do the best thing for ourselves, you know what I mean? Like, whatever we can to get ourselves some help. I mean, so there's no shame in that. So unwantedness and child abuse. This is an article. It's just a web page, and mostly it's to deal with, like I was saying, with the issue of planned pregnancies and and pregnancies that were not planned and the child was not wanted. But they do talk a lot about what happens in the situation where, if this happens, what happens to the children really involved where parents did not want their children and tend to abuse them. But there's also issues where children were wanted and then were abused as well. And so, they said there doesn't seem to be, a real issue of only children who were wanted are not abused. That's just not the case. And because they've done some studies, and found that that's just not true. And so they go and they talk about some of the issues. They said that if you scroll down just a ways through the page there, they start talking about, from our continuing study of the causes and effects of child abuse and neglect, we found that, number one, in less than 5% of the cases does child abuse occur in one form. 95% of children are affected by various combinations of abuse and neglect. The most damaging ones include some form of neglect. And number two, depending on the type and severity of the child abuse and neglect, there's a 30 to 50% chance that mistreatment will become transgenerational. Just passing the cycle on. That's what happened with my parents. I mean, they were both abused, and who knows what my grandparents went through. They were born in the late 1800s. So, I mean, we'd have to go back a ways to find out. I think there's a lot of dysfunction all the way through there. I don't think that my parents weren't taught any really good, relationship skills back in the 1920s, 1930s. It was all about trying to survive and these old ways and old methods and old ways of being. And children back then were just supposed to be. My parents would tell me that back in those days, children were just supposed to be seen and not heard. So they were not allowed to talk, and they weren't allowed to make noise around adults. They had to just be, quiet. They were, brought up in the late 1920s, early 1930s, and this would not have been a time where children were cherished, right? Maybe some people, somewhere did cherish their children, but most children were just farmhands. And my parents were both born into farming communities. They were both just farmhands, and they were both just expected to work like the adults, and there was no real childhood for them. But that's not where the abuse came in. I mean, that caused, I'm sure that had an effect on them, but they were abused as well, right? So it was just not good. So transgenerational, the cycle of abuse. Number three, the best explanation for the interactions is a triangle that involves a perpetrator, victim, and observer, and this triangle rotates with time and circumstances. And number four, children tend to blame themselves to varying degrees depending upon the severity and type of abuse. They are most likely to blame themselves for verbal and sexual abuse. I guess some children do. You know what I mean? I can imagine that some children do, just because they were told over and over that it was their fault, or that that wouldn't have happened to them if they had been different or whatever. I've heard this stuff and read this stuff. For me, I never took the blame on. Like I was talking yesterday, I really didn't take that role on, and I knew who was to blame because I was looking at my abusers right there, and I was like, that's them. They're the ones to blame. My mom would try to blame me. She would say stuff like, well, if your attitude was better and your behavior was better, I wouldn't have to beat you and I wouldn't have to hurt you, right? Because she was, steady, reaching for some implement to beat on me with, or throwing me into walls and stuff and bashing my head in. It's pretty sad, but really, I knew that she was just doing that, and I knew why she was doing it. Just out of sheer anger and rage, And so I knew that really it wasn't my behavior that was causing it. And the reason I kind of knew that is because my brother's behaviors were so much worse than mine. My brothers were like doing time in prison for all kinds of illegal activity. My brothers were doing drugs in the home, and like one of my brothers held a knife to my sister's throat and was trying to get her to basically be involved in an illegal robbery of a pharmacy, and she wouldn't drive him. She had just got her car and got her license, and she had just turned. Let's see, I was 12, so she would have been 17. And my brother held a knife at her throat for 2 hours in the home, and I was the one who was told to talk him out and talk him down and try to get the knife away from him, because my parents wouldn't, my mother wouldn't call the police on my brother, right? And he was just very high on drugs and stuff, but he made my sister actually drive him to do this. He never did really put down the knife. But the thing is that I knew that my behavior wasn't anything like that. And so, when my mother was abusing me, I knew that, and even physically, verbally, emotionally battering me, saying, well, you're just a bad kid, and I hate you, you're just a horrible child, and you've just caused me nothing but grief. I would look at my siblings' behavior, and I'd be like, I think they caused you a little more grief than I have, because I was actually not all that bad of a youth. I wasn't really causing all that much problems, and I was trying to be a good kid, right? And so, I didn't really take on that blame, but I know it's possible that children do, because especially if they're an only child and they don't have anything to judge their own behaviors against, and think, well, my behavior's not too bad, they may be, and for child sexual abuse, they may take the blame on for that as well. I've just read so much about that and seen so much of that with other people. For myself, I was abused sexually, but I never took the blame on, because I couldn't figure out why this was happening to me, and I was just like, this has nothing to do with me. You know what I mean? This is just this person's wanting to do something to me, because I was 8 years old and I didn't really understand what was going on anyway. You know what I mean? Like I it was a sibling, one of my brothers, and I loved my brother, and that's the sad part, is that was one of the brothers that I actually really cared for, really loved, and I couldn't figure out why he was doing this to me. You know what I mean? I was just kind of freaked out by it. So I told my mother, because I was in pain and it was bothering me, and she told me it was my problem. I was going to have to deal with it. So she knew about it, and she did nothing about it, and just told me that it was my problem and not hers, and that she didn't want to hear about it. And that's really quite sad, right, when people do that. So I never took the blame on for that. You know what I mean? I don't know, for some reason I was able to not do that. But I know some people do take the blame for and feel guilty for what happened to them as children. Mostly I was angry, extremely angry and hurt by what my parents had done and by what my sibling had done. And it just bothered me, and I thought, even for years after my brother actually sexually abused me, I thought it was my dad. I actually wanted to believe it was my dad. I talked myself into believing it was my dad, because my dad was also sexually abusive towards my mother, and I always felt really strange around my dad. Like, I didn't want him touching me, but he was one of my abusers, right? So, to me, it just seemed like my dad had done that to me, because I had sort of blocked it out. Bits and pieces I could remember, and then some of it I had blocked out. And I even today need to, if I really want to get in touch with those memories, I'll have to go and do some work, right? But the thing is I thought about it. I thought, well, this person had long hair, and I really started to think about who was, you know what I mean? And I thought, no, this person had long hair, and they were younger. My dad had really short hair, and he was older. But in the back of my mind, I wanted to believe it was my dad, because I hated my dad for so many years, And, my dad was very sick and twisted, and I thought, I just pictured it would be him that would do that to me. So for years and years, through my youth, all the way through my growing up from the time that I was 8, 9 years old, all the way through until I was 21, I really believed that it was my dad who had done this to me, and put it sort of in the back of my mind. It was a whole lot of, I was basically just trying to survive as a youth in that home, so this other stuff was just put back to the back, I wasn't even dealing with it. It was just trying to stay alive, really, and trying to, just trying to survive day to day. I wasn't really concerned about the stuff from the past until later, you know what I mean? But when I was 20, well, let's see, how old was I? My brother was, he was 13 years older than me, and so he tried to commit suicide many times, and this is the one that sexually abused me. He actually told me something on the phone, and I wrote about this in my book, A Life of Death, The Redemption. He was committing suicide. He had slit his wrist, and he was bleeding to death in a bathtub. And he phoned my mom, right, to tell her that he was killing himself and, all this stuff. He used to do this quite a bit, right? This is just another one of his suicide attempts. But he was talking to my mom. My mom actually said, "Oh, here, you talk to your brother, because I'm going to go across the street and grab the phone over there and call the police." Because, back in those days, that was not the days of cell phones. We didn't even have cell phones back then. And we had landlines, but no cell phones. So my mom had to run across the street to borrow the neighbor's phone so she could phone the police to tell them that, because my brother was in Canada, and she knew where he was. So she phoned the police, and then they got my brother. They saved my brother that time. But I was 13. Let's see. So my brother, how old would he have been? 11, 12. He would have been about 25 years old, maybe. And 13 or 26. Yeah, 26 years old, somewhere in there, 25 or 26 years old when this was happening. So I was talking to him on the phone while he was bleeding to death, and he had slit his wrist and he was dying. And he's like, when you were a baby and you were a little girl, I used to like to touch you, and you were so soft. And I was just listening to this, right? And I'm thinking, oh, my God. And then he says, I used to, excuse me, my voice is terrible this morning. He says, I used to like to touch you in a sexual way. It wasn't like a baby soft way. He says it was very much a sexual way. I was just like, that's the bugger that sexually molested me and sexually abused me. I was very angry because I realized then that, I could see the long hair. And you know what I mean? I could see this person. And as he was telling me this, the memories kind of came back to me, and people would say, well, maybe that's just, a thought in your mind. But actually, no, it's like it happened, you know what I mean? So I know, I'm very cognitive of what happened. I just didn't want to put the face with who it was. You know what I mean? Because I loved my brother. And I think in my mind I had to kind of block that out and sort of replace my dad in there, because I hated my dad and I loved my brother. So isn't that pretty sad? You know what I mean? It's just pretty sick and twisted, you know what I mean? And so, did I take the responsibility for that? No, definitely not. You know what I mean? That was not my fault. And, no 8-year-old child should ever, no child, I don't care who it is. There's no way a child could be responsible for somebody else who's sexually abusing them or sexually using them in any way, right? And so I did not, I'm glad I didn't take the blame or the guilt on for that, you know what I mean? But so many people do, and that's really sad. And I think it's just from the years of hearing or being told that, oh, yes, it was your fault, or, because so many people are, victimized and then told this by family members, right? And then they go on to say that, we have about a minute left here, but they say that mistreatment affects the child's self-perception and the child's outlook on the world, tends to make children suicidal, pessimistic, negative. Children who are physically abused tend to anticipate a violent death. So we'll pick this up tomorrow, because this is something that I always anticipated was a violent death, and I lived my life exactly according to that up until I was about 21 years old and decided to change my life. So we'll pick this back up tomorrow. So, and I'll be back on tonight on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio here at 9 o'clock p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And, make sure that you get some help. If you can't cope and you're just having a hard time, you reach out, like I keep saying on every show, but it's so important because I'm hoping to reach that person who is just saying, I can't do it. Because two of my brothers killed themselves, and it bothers me that they did not allow somebody to help them. You know what I mean? Like they just took their own lives, and they did not allow anybody to help them. And I swore that I would not do that. And so, that's kind of what kept me alive, because I was planning my suicides up until 4 years ago. And so, I made a commitment at that time that I would never, ever do that. and that I would be good to myself, and I would do the right things by myself, because obviously no one was doing that for me as a child. And so I wasn't taught how to do it. So at the age of 41, I decided, okay, I'm going to now take responsibility for my life, and I'm going to heal, and I'm going to I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to learn how to live instead of how to die. So that's my big message for people, and I say this almost on every show. And it's because it's so important, because I know that I've suicidal thoughts and suicidal feelings. I grew up with this. That's how I grew up. I grew up wanting to die. And so, at the age of 41, I thought, no, I want to live. At the age of 21, I did too, but it was just a sort of an attempt, to get going on my life. But I really never really wanted to really live until about the age of 41. So, I just want people to know, you've got to, it is your responsibility as an adult. We certainly couldn't help what happened to us as children. You know what I mean? But it is our responsibility as adults that we get help, that we need help. We have to get help, because we can't blame that on anybody else. This is our responsibility as adults. As children, there wasn't anything we could do about it. My God, we had to suffer what we had to suffer, and it's unfortunate, really sad, but that it never should have happened. But the thing is we can't change the past. But as adults, we are ultimately responsible for our lives. See, that's my parents. They were abused as children and would take no responsibility for their adult lives, and end up hurting their children and abusing their children and abusing each other themselves, because they were abused as children. And they used that lame excuse that, well, it wasn't our fault, it was his fault, or it wasn't my fault, it was always blaming somebody else. And, that's like me as an adult survivor saying, well, I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't heal because of what my parents did to me. And that's the same exact thing. It's the same thing, passing the buck, and no, we can't do that. As adults, we are responsible for our adult lives. And yes, whatever happened to us is absolutely horrible and horrific and never should have happened. But, in the meantime, I was doing that. I was allowing the abuse to ruin my life and destroy my life as an adult, right? Absolutely horrible. And this part of me still wants to do it because I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable in that space, right? So part of me still wants to be like that. I want to go out and do drugs. I want to go out and, part of me, half of me, I would say, the other half of me from before wants to go out and get in trouble with the law, wants to go out and do drugs and just run on the streets, as I did as a youth, and wants to go out and curse people and curse and because that's the part of me that's what my parents did to me. That's what my parents turned me into. But then there's another part of me that says, no, as an adult, I cannot do that because I'm ultimately responsible for my life. So if I allow this abuse to destroy me, then basically I allowed my parents to win this fight. And that is what I refuse to do. Because my parents tried to kill us and they wanted us dead. And they don't care. They didn't care if we ended up in prison or in hell or wherever. And they provided this nice little hell for us when we grew up. And so, it makes me it makes me so happy that I have decided to not allow what they did to me to destroy my life, because basically it allows me to win this fight. And that's why I'm just so sad, because my brothers couldn't see it. Two of my brothers couldn't see it, right? One of my brothers was murdered, so he never got a chance. But two of my brothers took their own lives, and they couldn't see it. They allowed my parents to win this fight. They allowed my parents to kill them, is what they did. And this is horrific. Don't allow that to happen to yourself. You make sure you get some help. I don't care what kind of help it is, but you reach out and you get some help and you stay with us and you have a good life, and that is your testimony that, hey, you know what, I survived and I win this fight. And you know what, to me that's just so important. We certainly didn't deserve to be treated that way, and we don't deserve to have a horrible adult life just because of what people did to us as children. So we have to make those excuse me, we have to make those right choices for ourselves. You know what I mean? And whatever that is, we have to do that for ourselves, because that's what my parents wouldn't do, and they were just a sad, sorry excuse for parents. And that's the truth. You know what I mean? Anybody who would hurt their children like that is not a good parent, And they made the choice to do that. See, we make a choice. So I make a choice, now, 4 years later, I make a choice since the age of 41 that I'm going to live and I'm going to survive this and I'm going to have a good life. I'm going to be good to myself and other people, and I'm going to do the right thing. And and I wish my parents would have done that, because then this would have never happened to me. But sadly enough, they made the wrong choice. Don't make the wrong choice for yourself. Take care of yourself and do whatever you can to stay alive and to fight this thing and to win. You know what I mean? Have a really good day, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.